Assalamu alaikum. This is Andre with the Best Tech. In this tutorial, we're going to master how to create a full stack food delivery app with React using the latest version of Expo, create a REST API with Node and Express, as well as MongoDB as our database. This tutorial is best suited for beginners to expert developers. So we're going to start a little bit slower and pick up the pace as we progress. In our backend, we're going to look at various technologies. First, we're going to incorporate Firebase Admin in our backend so that it can be easier for us to incorporate Firebase in our frontend. Our application is also going to be heavily reliant on role-based authentication. So that's the first thing that we want to emphasize on. We are going to have drivers, clients, restaurant owners, and we are going to have the admins, and we are also going to be looking on how to use packages like JSON Web Token, Crypto.js, .env. And one thing that I need to emphasize on, we're going to be using MongoDB aggregation so that we can create advanced pipeline, deliver the data to our user. In our front end, we're going to use React Native using the latest version of Expo. We're going to create a beautiful UI, and we're also going to get a pool of help from Google APIs. For example, we're going to be using routes for directions to give directions to the restaurant and also help drivers to get to their particular destination. Geocoding to get coordinates of both the user and restaurants for better recommendations and delivery prices. We're going to use distance metrics to calculate the price and distance as well as the time it takes for a user to get order. So without wasting any time, let's go ahead and introduce the main features of our application. So right now, let's go ahead and introduce the main features of our application. So this is what our application looks like. Our homepage, right on top, we have our header. In our header, we can see where we are delivering the food to. Okay, so if that's like your account, then this would be your current location, like the reverse geocode of your current location. So for this part, we're going to be using reverse geocode, get your current location, and then we reverse geocode the coordinates and get the current address. Okay, and here we have time. So this icon will change according to time. If it is in the afternoon, you see the sun. Evening, you see the moon. Like it will just change with time. So that's all for our header. Right at the bottom, we have categories. So our categories are dynamic, as we said before. So like each and every time we refresh the application, let's say we got 50 categories in our application. These categories are going to change each and every time, but one category is not going to change, which is the last one. If you click on the last one, then you're bound to get to see more details. So if you press on categories, our homepage changes. It will bring you the food related to the category that you clicked, and our title also changes here. Browse fried rice category. Okay, so if you click again, then our homepage will change. So here we have a set of nearby restaurants, right? So these restaurants are suggested according to your current location. So in this instance, we are using the district that you're in to suggest you restaurants closer to you. So these restaurants are also dynamic. We're using a pipeline to suggest random restaurants in a particular district to the user. So let's just press here for a second. If we press, our data should change dynamically, like when the state changes. Okay, like now. So here, our first was La Foods. Now we have Burger King as our first, La Pizzeria. So now we have a different set of data. So if we have multiple restaurants in our backend, which are related to the location that you're in, then you're bound to get more suggestions each and every time that you open the application. So moving on, down here we have try something new. So try something new is the foods. So each and every restaurant here that we have in our region, in our district, have their own menus. So when we're suggesting food to users, we're going to go through the menus of those restaurants and suggest food to our users. So let's take for example, here we have a spaghetti, a mixed grill platter. We have like a random food. If we click back so that we can have a state change, we are receiving a new set of data whenever our state changes. So that's how our application is going to work. And if we go underneath, we're going to be recommending food according to the and distance time and distance, like which one is fastest to you at that particular moment. We can do the same to refresh our state. So here, fastest near to you, 35 minutes, 45 minutes, 20 minutes. So our time is delivered time plus preparation time. It's not just delivery time. So this is the time. If you order food now for the food to reach to you, this is the time it takes for them to prepare the food and deliver to you. Okay, so that's all for our homepage. Next, we want to go ahead and introduce our restaurant page. So in our restaurant page, if you click, then this is the page that we see right at the top. We have the image, we have back button, we have the share button, and here we have the rating of the restaurant. And down below, we have the title of the restaurant, the distance between you and the restaurant. Okay, between the user and the restaurant, the cost of the delivery according to your current location, the preparation time and the delivery time. So preparation time and delivery time. So on a regular, it's like restaurants, they have to set their average preparation time. So we're going to take that average preparation time to prepare a meal plus the time it takes for us to deliver, and then we're going to add them together. Then we are going to have our approximate preparation and delivery time. Down at the bottom, we have the menu. So this is the menu. If you're in this restaurant, these are the foods related to that particular restaurant, the food they offer. Okay. So you can navigate through and you can add to cart from here. And if we go to pick up, it shows us the map with the route to with the route or route to the restaurant. So this restaurant is 100 meters away. So here we are using polylines on our map to show the direction, and we're also going to be using markers to show the marker of your current location as a user and a marker for the restaurant itself. And down below we do have the address of the restaurant, and if we click on directions, we're taken to a native map. So let's say you're on iOS, then you're taken to maps, and then you can just write your address and you can get directions to that particular location. So let's go back to our application. So the other thing, we're also going to be, when you are registering a restaurant, we're going to require the user to be at least at the site of the restaurant so that we can get the current coordinates of the restaurant, because we are going to be using current location as our base to get the restaurant location. Okay, so if you register a restaurant while you're in the wrong place, then your restaurant is going to be far from everyone else. So you have to register a restaurant while you are at the restaurant. So let's go to explore. Let's take, for example, our restaurant doesn't have any food. So explore, it will just return the foods which are in your vicinity, in your particular area. So let's say a district, for example. If you're in Union Square, then the food that you're going to get here in Explore, they're sort of like recommendations. Okay. So these will be the recommendations for you in Union Square. And if you want to rate the restaurant, then you can just go ahead and press rate this restaurant. This is the page that you will see. You can rate rate the restaurant and you can submit the rating. Okay, so let's press back. Okay, let's just press on the button. So if we press here, we're taken to the food itself. So this is our food. We have our title, our price, our description. These are the tags related to that particular food, and these are the additives. So our page is set up in a way that, okay, if you want your meal with some additives, you just need to click this bounce check box, and the price of the additive that you've added will be added to your price. Okay. Too many zeros. It will be added to your price. After it's added to your price, then you can go ahead and press an order. So let's take, for example, here we need 2 of this spaghetti with eggs. So if you increase the quantity, then your price is going to go high. Okay. So at the moment, we are not logged in. That's why we can't even have, like, we can't add something to the cart. Okay. So if we take a look here, if you go to the profile, we are redirected to the profile page. Not to the profile page, but to the login page. So we're supposed to log in. If we log in, then we can be able to add things to the cart, and we can be able to place an order, because we need a user ID to achieve something like that. So I'm going to log in using my own account. So right now we need to proceed and log in. So to log in, we need our email and we need our password. But before we log in, if you don't have an account, you can press register. So this is our registration page. You can input your username, your email, and your password, and then you can press sign up. Everything is functional. And here we have to just put our password, and then we log in. Yeah, okay. So right now we're logged in. So if you're logged in, then here we're going to have a different page, which is the profile page. Yeah, okay. And in our profile page, we have our profile. Our data is taking a little bit longer to load, but here we're supposed to have our email and our username. Down at the bottom, we just have a setup, like orders, places, coupons, and if you're a registered vendor, then your store is going to be here. Shipping address, service center, and settings. So here we give users options to register a restaurant and to even join the courier team. Okay, so now that we are logged in, we can try to go ahead and add something to the cart. Okay, so here our cart count is 0. This is cart count. So let's say we want to add this particular item to the cart. If we press add, then this item should be added to the cart, and our count here should change dynamically. So now we have 1 item to the cart. If we go back, even our bed changed from 0 to 1, and if we click, we have 1 item, and this is the additive that we've added to our to our cart item. So right here, we can be able to delete this cart item. If we delete, it will be gone and our badge will also change. So let's go back. So let's say we want to add this. Our cart count is 1, and then we're going to add something else. Our cart count is 2. So if we go back, our cart count is 2, and we have 2 items in our cart, and these are the additives that we've added to our cart item. With that, we can even just go ahead and order something straight from here. So if you're ordering something, we have a model show up on our screen showing the title of the food, the image, and the description. And here, it'll be the address of the user. So you're supposed to have a default address. Your default address will be shown here. The order details will be shown below, and you can proceed to order your food. So let's bring this down. And if we press on logout, then we're supposed to be taken to this particular page. Hello everyone, this is Andre with the Best Tech. In this tutorial, we're going to master how to create an advanced backend for a food delivery app. So right here, I have an application running the same backend. So I'm just going to be running tests using the application as well as using Postman for the tests. Before we get started, we want to start with authentication. So the authentication for this particular backend is going to consist of 2 parts. It's going to use MongoDB as well as Firebase. So when a user is signing up for a new account, we're going to create 2 separate accounts, one for Firebase and one for the one that we're going to store in our database. Let's take, for example, we have this data. We want to sign up a new user. So if we send this request, this user is already registered. That means this user has already registered with our Firebase. So if we go to our Firebase, this user is already existent. So I'm going to delete this account, go back, check our MongoDB, go to users. Even if the user is not here, if that user has a Firebase account, that email won't register. Okay, so that's the first part. So if we take a look now, if we send the same request, we're going to have a different response. So this user is now created. So if we go to our browser, we refresh this page and we refresh this page, we should have a new account with the details that we just passed. So here, this is our new user, and this is the UID to the user. If we go to our database, we have a new user. This UID is the same as the UID that's in our Firebase. Okay, that's the first part. And our authentication relies heavily on roles and the rest of our API, because it's a food delivery app. We should have drivers, vendors, admin, and clients. All right, so those roles, they have to be set. So we are going to be using enums in our REST API to achieve such a thing. So like if we go here and if we go to our user model, so here we are setting roles whenever we are signing up. Okay, so default role is going to be a client role. That's what we have now when we sign into this account. So if we take the same email address and try to log it in, then we'll see that user. So let's send this request. This is our same UID, our ID, our client user type. User type is going to be client, and all our data is going to be encrypted and stored in our user token. So the token is the one that we're going to be using throughout the application to run some requests, and we're going to be using our middleware to extract the data from our token. Okay, so after this, let's go ahead and introduce whatever we have here on our home screen. So we have categories. So our categories are going to be dynamic in the sense that we're going to create a pipeline that's going to be sending random categories each and every time the state of the application changes. So like, let's take, for example, a user closes the application and open the application. They're not going to see the same categories. Let's say we have 50 categories. They're going to be recommended new categories each and every time. So here we have an option to see more categories, whereby you can just click and see all the categories. So if we go to our categories in Postman get random categories, send this request. See here, our first item is chicken. Okay, our first object is chicken, our first category. If we send the same request, that changes. But one thing is not changing in our request, which is the last one. The last category is going to be always more, because if we click on it, we have to get all the categories related to our application. So that's it for our categories. And the way that we can use them is like, if we just click here, then we can just change our home screen to display all the food related to that particular category in your provided location. So we're going to be relying heavily on location as well, so that we can recommend food to people and restaurants to people within their particular vicinity. Nearby restaurants, we're going to be using the same approach, whereby we are getting the location of the user and we recommend them restaurants which are closer to them. So if we go to Postman and go to restaurants, we're going to be using a code or a district of a particular area to recommend users the restaurants. So let's take, for example, here we have nearby restaurants. Right here, our first one is La Foods. So if we send the request here, we're going to get a new set of data, right? Randomized set of data. And if we take a look at the restaurants that we're getting, they have the same code. And this code is the code that we just passed right here on top. So it's the same code. So if we send the same requests, we're supposed to get a new set of data, and the codes have to be the same. That means these restaurants are in the same vicinity, they're in the same area. This particular approach is the same approach that we're going to use for food. We're going to recommend people food in their particular area, because we don't have to just get data from the backend and just send them to the front end. We have to send the food according to the area a person is in. Okay, so these restaurants have food, right? Each and every restaurant have menus, so we'll get the food from the menu and recommend to the user. So this is something that we have here. We are recommending food, right? So let's take, for example, here, just on the application that I'm running, if I refresh the application, then the orders of all the things that we have here should change. Okay, so let's take, for example, I press R to just reload this data is going to be shuffled, and I'm going to get a new set of data. So this happens when an application is closed or changed, or the state of the application changes. Everything changes on the home screen. So all this is being taken care of in the backend. So by default, when a user is creating an account, they will get a client role. And after they've registered for a restaurant, then they'll get a vendor role. All right. So in this sense, we have to protect, like a client doesn't have to upload food to the application. Only a registered vendor can do that. And only drivers can take care of deliveries. And without wasting time, let's just go ahead and introduce our cart. So here we have our cart, and our cart is empty. So let's say we want to add this particular board to our cart. So this here is cut count. So our cut count at this particular moment is 0. And here our food schema is made in a way that we have additives to any particular food. We're not just uploading the food, we are uploading the food with additives. So additives, they have their own price. So if you add something to your order, then the price will increment a little bit. So even the quantity, like that. So if I add this item to the cart, then this should change to 1. So that means we have 1 item to our cart. And if we go back now here, if we take a look at the badge, the cart count is 1 also. That means we have 1 item in our cart. If we take a look, we have the item that we just added to the cart, and the additives that we added to our food are here. Okay, so all this, we're going to achieve it in our backend. It'll be easier for you to use any technology to transform the backend to a fully fledged full stack application. So if we visit our profile, we'll get the user data here right on top, and all the pages you can get orders according to user orders, favorite places, payment history is something that you can do in the backend. The backend is scalable to that extent, and you can also add addresses. So here we have addresses, right? You can get address, add address. So if you add an address, you can have more addresses to pick from, and you can be able to set an address as default. So if you set an address as default address, that's the same address the application is going to use to calculate the distance between you and the restaurant. Okay, so let's take, for example, here we're using the default address to calculate the distance between the person and the restaurant, and the cost the delivery is going to take, and the time the food is going to take to be prepared. And if we come here, a restaurant should have a default location. So that means if a vendor is creating a restaurant, they should create that restaurant at the particular location of their restaurant, so that here we can get the coordinates to their particular restaurant and give the users directions to that particular restaurant if they want to go and pick their food by their own self. And we have an option to just recommend food in the page, in the restaurant page. So if they can't find whatever they want to buy from this restaurant, they can just go to explore and explore some other foods from other restaurants. And we have the ability to push ratings of a particular restaurant. So here, that's where we are going to be dealing with our ratings, and then we can just submit ratings. So that's a little about our backend. Like, more of the stuff is going to be explored when we're creating our backend step by step and running some tests in Postman. But before we get started, one important thing, you should have a collection, a Postman collection to the backend. It's going to be provided to you, the link below. Download the collection, and then you can import the collection by just clicking this button and drag and drop, or select where the file is, and then you can import the collection so that you can have the same setup as I have. This is Andre. So now we want to start working on our backend. So what we're going to do, we're going to create a new folder. So after we create a new folder, then we're just going to work on our folder structure, then we can get into our project. So this part is for the backend. Okay, so what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and just open a file. We want to create a new folder. So I've already created a folder, and the name of the folder is Foodly Backend. So you can do the same. You can create your own folder, give it a name that you want, and then the next thing that you need to do, you need to open your code editor. I don't know which code editor you're using, but for me, I'm going to go ahead and use VS Code. Okay, so you open your code editor and you drag and drop the folder that you just created. Okay, so I have a little bit of way more windows open here, so I'm just going to minimize them. Need to open a new window. After opening a new window, I'm going to drag and drop the folder that I just created. Then we are good to go. Okay, so that's what we need to do first, create a new folder, and then we put it in our VS Code. Then we can start with our project. So let's just make this full screen. The next thing that we need to do in our project, we need to initialize the project itself. So we need to open the terminal. After opening the terminal, we're just going to run the command npm init. Okay, so here I'm going to put /y so that I can accept all the options they're going to give us. So I'm just going to go ahead with the default options. Okay, so our node server has been created here. Okay, so this is our node server. So the next thing that we need to do, let's just go ahead, clear our terminal. After clearing our terminal, we need to go ahead and install dependencies. So here, to install dependencies, I'm going to run the command npm I, and then I'll write the name of the dependencies that I want to install. The process is the same if you run the command npm install, then you write the name of your dependencies. So the first dependency that we're going to need is .env. After .env, we're going to need Mongoose, and we're going to need Firebase Admin. So for this part, we might not use Firebase Admin as much, but it's something, it's just a norm. just to install it and do our processes while we have Firebase installed. Okay. We also need JSON Web Token. After token, we need Express, since we're going to be creating an application using Express. And we also need NodeMon to hot reset our server. And we also need Crypto.js to encrypt and decrypt our passwords. Last but not least, we're going to require body parser. Okay. So those are the dependencies that we are going to require for this particular project. So if we have an error here, a typo, then these dependencies are not going to install. We have to go ahead, correct the error, and then install again. But for now, I'm just going to try to run it. If we do have an error, then we can just rectify it and run the command again. So this might take a little bit. While our dependencies are installing, we are going to go ahead and create our folder structure. So the first folder that we're going to require is the one for controllers. Okay. Let's call it controllers. Next, we're going to require another folder for models. So in our directory, project directory, we're also going to require the one for route. Okay, so we need about 4 folders. The last folder that we're going to need is the one for our middleware. Okay. So this is our folder structure. Last but not least, we're going to create our server file. Okay. So we need to create a new file here, and I'm going to call it server.js, like that. Okay. So here I'm going to create the server. So you should have at least Node.js snippets. Okay, so I'm just going to create a mock server. So I'm going to use the command Node.js here. Okay, to create a server. So this is our server here. Let's save. Right now, we need to go to our package.json. In our package.json, we need to put our NodeMon here so that we can use NodeMon to hot reset our server each and every time that we make a change to our application. So instead of tests, I'm going to change this to start, and I'm going to get rid of this command here, and I'm going to say, okay, here let's just say server.js. It's supposed to be NodeMon server.js. So each and every time when we run the command npm start, this is the command that we're going to run inside the scripts. Okay. So let's take, for example, here, we run the command npm start. Okay, so our application is running already, and it's running on port 3000. So if we come here and take a look at our port, that's 3000, and this message is the same message that's being logged on our console. Okay, so we are done creating our server. Right now, let's go ahead and just create another file, and this file is going to be our .env file. Okay, so in our .env file, we're going to store all our secret variables. That's including the ports, DB URL, and the secrets that we're going to use to encrypt and decrypt the passwords, as well as for our JSON Web Token. Our server is running. What we need to do, we need to go ahead and create our .env variables. So the first variable that we're going to require is a port. So I'm going to capitalize this one. So for port, I'm going to use 6000 2. Okay, that's the port that I'm going to use. After that, we're going to need Mongo URL. So in this section, we're also going to go ahead and create our database. So for this part, we're going to leave it like this, and we're going to revisit, and then we can put our URL here. We need JWT secret. So I'm just going to call it JWT sec, and then here I'm going to give it a name. So the name is going to be Foodly 2023. Let's just copy paste this and we change the name. We're going to also require a secret. So this secret is the one that we're going to use for JSON Web Token to encrypt our token and also decrypt. Okay, so these are the variables that we need. Right now we have 3 variables, so we are left with our Mongo URL. So we can go to our browser, go to MongoDB. In MongoDB, we need to sign in. So if you don't have an account, you can just go ahead and create. But if you do, then you can sign in into your account. You can either use Google, GitHub, or use your email. But for me, I'm going to sign in with my Google account. After signing in, we're going to create a database. So before we create a database, we might need a cluster. So I'm just going to show you how to create a database, a cluster, then a database. But I'll be using an old database that I have because I have like a lot of them. So the first thing that you need, if you get to your dashboard, the first thing you need to go ahead and create a project if you don't have one. Okay, you need to go ahead and create a project. So here, these are the projects that I have. But if you don't have any project created, you can just come here, create a new project. So you need to give the project a name. So the name is going to be Foodly. Okay, let's put it in lowercase. Foodly, and you press next. Here, if you have 2 members, you can add their email so that they can access the database. But I'm just going to go ahead and create the project. After creating the project, now we need to go ahead and create a cluster. Okay. So here, we're going to press create. After pressing create, this is where we're going to choose what kind of database we want to create. So since we're just going to create this application, it's not yet in production, so we can go with the free tier. And I'm going to use AWS, and you can choose a location which is closer to you here. So I'm going to leave it with the default location, and the cluster name, I'm going to give it the same name as the project name, like Foodly. And then press create. We need to fill the reCAPTCHA. After filling the reCAPTCHA, we need to go ahead and create our username, okay, and password. That's like the account that we are going to use to access the database. Okay, so here I'm just going to use the same credentials throughout so that it will be easier for me to remember. Okay, so database name and username, they're going to be the same for me, but you can put different credentials, and we create a user. Okay, so our user has been created. You can see here we have our user. And the next thing that we need to do, we need to connect to a cloud environment, and we need to add an IP address. So I'm going to use a universal IP address because I want to access this database from anywhere in the world. So like putting a universal IP address, it makes our application it makes it simpler for application to access our database, even if we change the IP address. Okay. So here, I'm just going to give it a name universal and add entry. After adding entry, this is our IP address, and I'm going to remove this IP address on top, and I'm going to finish and close. Okay. Go to overview. Okay. So we're almost done creating our database. The next thing that we need to do, we need to press connect. After pressing connect, this window will pop up, and after it pops up, you need to go to MongoDB for VS Code, and you need to copy the URI. Okay. After copying the URI, you can close, and then go back to your project. So in your project, you need to paste the URI. So here, this is our database name, our database username. Okay. And the username is the same as our password. So we just need to replace this password with the password. And we need to specify the database name. So the database name comes after this line. Even if you don't put the database name, MongoDB is going to assign a database name for you, and the name is going to be test. Okay. But for me, I just need to have a name to my database. That's Foodly. Okay. So we are done with this part. Next, we are going to go ahead and try to access our DNB files, and then try to connect to our database here. Okay. Let's go ahead and set up and configure our .env, because we need to access our env variable in our server.js. So to do that, the first thing that we need to do right at the top, we need to initialize our .env. So we're going to have const.env is equal to required.env. Okay. So once we initialize .env, now we're able to use this variable in our application. So right at the bottom, we're going to initialize our .env. So right now we are good to go. We can be able to use the variables that we have in this file in our application. Just for a test, what we're going to do, we're going to change this port, the port that we are running our application from, to the one that we have in our .env file. So here, what I'm going to do, okay, let's leave this as 3000, but down here, to access our .env file, we use the syntax process.env, then we put the variable name. So that's going to be our first option whenever we run our application. So when we are running our application, we are going to access our .env file, look for the port number. If the port number is found, then we are going to use that port number to run our application. If that port number is not found, then we're going to use a default port number that we have here to run our application. Okay. So our variable name is this port. Okay. So that's the name that we're going to write here. So we're going to access our .env, get the port, and then run our application. If this port is not found, then we're going to go ahead and run our application on this port that is provided here. Okay. So we can just write port here, and then we can console log. So let's just change our message here. So here we can say Foodly backend app listening on port. So we need to change this, because this port is the port that we're displaying here. So if we write this as port, we're going to display this name, not the port that we're getting from our .env file. So we just need to copy this line that we wrote here and then put it in here. Okay. So now our application is running on port 6002. So if we come here to our .env file and change this port number to 6001, save, go back to our server.js and save this again. Now you see our application is running on port 6001. So that's how we can access our .env variables and use them in our server. So let's change this back to 6002. Next thing that we need to do, since we have access to this .env, is to connect to our database, okay? So to connect to our database, we need to have an instance of Mongoose right on top, okay? So right after our .env, we're going to have another variable with the name Mongoose. Mongoose is equal to require Mongoose, okay? Now we're going to use this instance to connect to our database. And we are going to do it right after this .env initialization, okay? So to connect to our database, we're going to access our Mongoose instance, and then we're going to connect. So to connect to our database, we're going to require our Mongo URL, okay? So to access our Mongo URL, we need to access our .env file, get the URL, and then connect to our database. So we're going to use the same syntax that we used here, okay? So we might as well just, okay, let's just write, not copy, supposed to be process.env, and make sure that the name is the same as the one that you used in your .env file. So you need to copy this name and then you put it here. So this is our Mongo URL. So since we're going to be waiting for our database to connect, we need to check whether our database is connected or we do have an error. So we need to have then. So if our database is connected, then we're going to go ahead and log something on our console. Okay, so here we're going to say, okay, it's supposed to be a string. We're going to say DB connected. Else, if the process is not successful, we're going to go ahead and catch the error. So here we need to catch the error and log the error. Okay, so if we save here, first we connected to our server, next we connected to our database. So if this message is logged on our console, that means we are successfully connected to our database. So now we're done with our .env variables for our database, our port, and connecting to our database. The next thing that we're going to do, we're going to work on our model. But before we go to our models, the next thing that we want to do is to just go ahead and have our instance of our body parser right on top. So we're going to take home body parser. Is equals to require body parser. We need to close this. Now we have our body parser right before we send our data back, or our right before our endpoint. Okay, right before our endpoint, we need to go ahead and use body parser. Okay, so here we're going to use body parser.json. And we're also going to require URL encode. Inside of our URL encode, we're going to set a send it through. Okay, like that. And let's close this here. We can close this one. So we are done with this part. Next, let's move on to our models. After creating our models, then we move on to our controllers. The best way that we can create a model, and then we can work on the controllers so that we can have a section by section, whereby we're just creating the model, creating the controllers, routes, and then we can test that section in Postman, and then we can proceed to the next one. Okay. We want to initialize our Firebase because each and every time that we're creating an account, be it like we are using our database, we have to create another account in our Firebase. Okay. So to do that, we need to initialize Firebase first in our backend. So whenever a user is registering an account, we create an account for them in Firebase, and we create another account for them in our backend or database. Okay, so they'll have two accounts because it makes life easier. Like, okay, when you're trying to expand the application, let's say you want to like add a chat option to the application. If you're going to use Firebase, and now you have all the credentials and stuff in Firebase already, so it's easier for you to take it the next step, like a step further. Okay, so that's the approach that I'm going to use. So to do that, the first thing that we require right at the top, I'm going to go ahead and have a variable with the name admin. Okay, so our admin is going to require Firebase admin. Okay, here we already have Firebase admin installed. After our Firebase admin, we need to specify where we are getting our service account key. That's the JSON file that we're going to get from Firebase. So what we can do, we can just say const service account. Okay, account is equal to you require. Now we need to specify the path where we are getting this service account. Okay. So I'm going to leave it as empty because we need to go back to our browser, go to Firebase, create an account or use an existing account to get the JSON file. Okay. And right at the bottom, we're going to initialize our Firebase. So to initialize our Firebase, we need to say admin.initialize app. Okay. When initializing app, we require the service account. Okay. But that's where all our keys are being stored. Okay. So in here, we are going to require our credentials. And our credentials are coming from admin dot credential, and then we need to access the certificate, and this certificate is the one that we stored in this variable here. So we need to just take this name and put it here. So the thing that's left now is to go ahead and get the file, put it in our backend, and then we can specify the path. Okay, so we need to go to Firebase. In our Firebase, you just go ahead, create a new project or use an existing one. So for me, I'm going to use an existing one. So for the existing one, you can just press the account, okay, that you want to use. After pressing the account that you want to use, you go to project setting. Before you go to project settings, you need to make sure that you have authentication here. And your authentication has to be the email password. It has to be enabled, okay? So you can add new provider, then you can enable it, okay? After enabling, you need to go to project settings. Okay. In project settings, you need to go to service account because we were trying to get the service account for our Firebase admin. Okay. So you need to wait a little bit while this is still loading. After it has successfully loaded, what you need to do here, you need to go ahead and generate a new private key. Okay. So this is what we've done so far. Okay. So if you just copy this, it's the same thing that we've done. Okay. So you need to generate the private key and then just download it. So it's been downloaded. It's here. Okay. So I already have one in here with the name service account key. So that's the one that I'm going to use. So what I would do is to go ahead and drag this into VS Code. Okay, let's see. Let's just bring our VS Code first. Let's bring it forward first before we continue. Let's minimize it a little bit. Let's make it smaller. So you just need to drag and drop this into the root directory. Okay. So let's say this is the one that we just downloaded. Okay. So you can just rename it to service account key. Then you drag and drop the service account key into your project. And then now the only thing that's left to do is to specify the path. Okay. So here our path is going to be this service account key. So now we can be able to use our Firebase inside of our backend. So that's all that we need to do for Firebase. Next, we're going to work on our models, controllers, and routers. So these ones, we're going to do them simultaneously while we're testing them, because it's pointless for us to just create the backend without testing the progress. So we create a model, create the controllers, create the routes, test those controllers and the routes, then we can move on to the next one. And one other thing to note before we proceed, we're going to have models which are going to be models and functions which are going to be like depending on each other. So for those ones, we're going to take some steps or skip some steps, and then we can come back, work on them while we have all the data that we need, but we are going to touch them as we go, like touch them, work on what we need to work on, revisit when we have the necessary data, make some changes, and then we can proceed. We need to move on to our models. The first model that we're going to create is a user model. So let's go ahead and open our models folder. In our models folder, we need to create a new file, and we need to call it user. Okay, and it has to be a JS file. It has to be a JS file. Okay. After creating this file, the first thing that we're going to require in this file is our instance of Mongoose. So here, Mongoose require, and we're going to require Mongoose like that. After that, we need to create our schema. So to create our schema, we're going to require the name of the schema. So our schema name is going to be user schema. Okay. Is equal to new schema. It's supposed to be mongoose.schema. Okay. So in here, that's where we're going to put all the data related to our schema. Okay. So first, for user, we're going to require the username. So our username is going to be of type string. So we need to specify the type. Type is going to be a string. So if you're writing schemas, then all our types, they're going to be uppercase here. Just take note. It doesn't have to be lowercase. It has to be uppercase. And this field is going to be required. So we need to set required to true. So that's what we need to do. It doesn't have to be unique because users might have the same name. But our next field, which is going to be our email, is going to be unique because we want to avoid situations whereby a user registers multiple accounts with the same email. Okay, so our email type is going to be string, required is going to be true, and it's going to be unique. So you need to set the property unique to true, like that. And the other property that we're going to require is UID. So this field is going to come from our Firebase. Once we created an account in our Firebase, then we're going to get the UDI, and the UDI we're going to use it here. Okay. So we don't need to access our Firebase, but we just need to access our backend, get the UDI from our user, then we can use it the way that we see fit. Let's go ahead. Our next value is going to be a password. As for password, it has to be a string, required going to be true, unique. It doesn't have to be unique. It can be the same password, but for our password, we're going to encrypt it. So when we're encrypting our passwords, they're going to be different. There's no way that we're going to have the same password in our database. Right after that, we're going to require an address. So for our addresses, we're going to store them as an array. Okay. So here, every user should have an array of passwords. And required here, we can just set it to false. It's not required whenever we're creating an account. But somehow when we're ordering, we're going to require an address so that the delivery guy will know where he's supposed to deliver the food. And right at the bottom, we're going to have a phone. So for phone, it has to be a string here. Required set to false, that's okay. And for we need to have different user types because since it's a food delivering app, we're going to have driver, we're going to have the admin, the client, and we're going to have the seller or the vendor who, like the person who has a restaurant that a client is buying from. So here we need to specify user type. Okay, so for user type is going to be a string, required is going to be true, and we need to go ahead and have an enum value here. Okay, so for enums, it has to be an array. We need to specify the types of users that we're going to have in our application. So the first one is going to be admin, and we're going to have the drivers. Let's just say driver, not drivers. After that, we're going to have a client, and we're also going to have a vendor. Okay. So here we can also set a default value. So whenever an account is being created, we will have a default value. So our default value is going to be client. Okay. So we just need to copy this and we paste it here. So that's for user type. Okay. And as for our profile, we need a picture. So for profile, I don't want to make this project a little bit bigger than it is now. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to add the type. After adding the type, I'm going to set a default profile. Let's say required. I'm going to set it to true. And I'm going to provide a default image. Okay. And this has to be a string. So for a default image, you can just pick an image that you want to use as your default image. So for me, I'm going to open up my notes. After opening my notes, I'm just going to get one profile, okay, from the images that I have here and paste it in here like that. So that's going to be my default profile picture. Okay, so we're done with that part. We need to go ahead and export. We need to go ahead and export our model. But before we export, what we need to do, we need to set timestamps to true, because we need to know the date with which an account is being created or updated. So here, our timestamps, we're going to set them to true. Right at the bottom, we're going to go ahead and export this model. Okay, so to export, we're going to use module.exports. Is equals to, now we need to specify the name of the model. So mongo.model, we need to specify the name of the model first. So our model name is going to be user, and then we need to map it to the schema name. So our schema name is going to be a user schema. So that's all for our user model. We're done with our user model. The next thing that we're going to do is to go ahead and work on our functions to create a user, to register a user. Okay, after register a user, then we can try to log in. And at the same time, we're going to be looking at our middlewares. So our middlewares, we're going to split our function for authentication and logging in a user. Okay, it's like getting a user. Getting a user, they have to be in a different bracket from authentication, because authentication doesn't require a middleware. When we're creating a user, we don't require a middleware. When we're logging in a user, we don't require a middleware. Those are open routes. But when it comes to our user endpoints, those ones, they have to be protected, because that's where we're going to be editing our user, like updating our user, getting the profile, deleting user. So we need to have some kind of a middleware to check whether this person who's trying to delete this account is a registered user or not. Does this account belong to them or not? Okay. So right now we need to go ahead and create our auth controllers. So we need to go to our controllers folder, create a new file, and we're going to call it auth controller. It has to be a JS file. After creating this file, we need our model first. Right at the top, we're going to have an instance of our model. So here it's supposed to be require, and we need to specify the path where we are getting the model. So we need to access our model. After accessing our model, we need to access this user model that we have here. So if we click on it, we are taken to the file. If you're not taken to the file, then probably you've done something wrong. The path has to be a link to the model. Okay. So now that we got that out of the way, let's save that. The next thing that we need to do, we need to have an instance of our crypto.js. It's supposed to be crypto.js with caps is equal to require in here we're going to require an instance of our crypto.js. Okay, so the second one here is the one that we're taking. After that, let's go ahead and have an instance of our JWT. So we're going to have JWT is equal to require JSON web token. So we have our JSON web token already installed when we initialized our application. So now it's time to use it. So we have it, and we also require admin. Okay, that's going to be the Firebase admin is equal to require Firebase admin, like that. So these are the things that we need before we start working on our controller. Right below that, we need to export our functions. So to export our functions, we're going to use module export, module.export, and we're going to export everything that we're going to have inside of our braces in here. So all our functions are going to be inside this export. Okay, so let's say, so first we're going to create a function with the name create user. Okay, so this function is the one that we're going to be using to create a user. So first, this function has to be asynchronous. Since we're going to be communicating with our database, Firebase, we need to wait for those processes to be completed before we get the response from our function. And for this function, we're going to require a request and a response. Okay, so a request is what we send to our function. Okay, the response is what we get. So that's our first function. So for this controller, we're going to have two functions. The one to create a user and the other one to log in a user. So let's just create the other one, which is login user. Okay, so this is the second one. But first, we're going to work on creating a user before we log in a user. So when we're creating a user, what we require the data from wherever we are trying to sign in from, be it from Postman. Okay, so we need to capture that data and store it in a variable that we're going to access in our backend, and then map the data to their respective fields. Okay, so this variable, we're going to call it a user, and it's going to get data from the request body. Okay, so once we get the data from the request body, we're going to have try catch. Since we're going to be communicating with our Firebase in our database, we're going to have multiple try catch blocks, because each and every process we have to check whether the process that we are trying to achieve has been successful or not. If it is not successful, then we're going to catch the error. If it is successful, then we're going to do whatever the function requires us to do. Okay, so the first thing that we need to use our Firebase or admin here to create a user, to check for a user. Okay, so like let's take, for example, we have a new user. All right, before they even register, we need to check whether we do have an existing user in our Firebase or not. If we have an existing user, that means that user has been registered to our application already, so we can prompt them to log in. If we don't, then we're going to create a new account for them, a Firebase account. Then we can go ahead and create another account that we're going to store in our database. Okay, so first thing that we're going to do, we're going to await our admin, and we're going to create, not create a user, but here we're going to call auth, and in our auth, we need to get user. Okay, get user by email. So we need an email. Okay, so this email is going to come from this user that we have here. So since we're getting all the data from our request and store it in here, so that means our email is going to be inside here. So we need to access this user instance, and from this instance, we're going to get the email. That's the one that we're going to use. Okay, so here we're going to have a response dot status 400, and then we're going to pass. So if this, okay, if we pass an email here and we find a user in here, then that means that account is existing. So we just need to pass a response saying that the account exists. So we want to have a scenario whereby we don't have that account in our Firebase. That's when we are going to proceed in creating an account. Okay, so here we need to pass a JSON. Instead of our JSON, we need to pass a message. Okay, supposed to be a message here. So our message has to be a string. So here we can say email already in use or already registered, something like that. So that's all we need to do in our try. That's all that we need to do in our try. Our first try. So once we don't have, if nothing is found here, right, then our auth is going to return an error. Okay, this error that we have here, and we need to use this error to our advantage and use it to create an account. So here we're going to have this error code. When it's coming from Firebase, it's going to be error.code. So we need to access this code and check whether the error that we got is equals to the phrase auth user not found. Okay, it's supposed to be not. So if our error is equals to this error that we have, then we're going to go ahead and create an account. So our account is going to be created in our catch block, not in our try, right? But inside of this condition, we're going to have a try catch. Okay. In our try catch, we're going to go ahead and have an instance. We're going to create an instance with the name user response. So for this one, we need to use our admin to create a user. So it's synchronous. So we need to await admin dot create. So it's supposed to be auth first, and then we need to create a user. Okay. So for a user, we're going to create this user using the data that we're getting from our request body. Supposed to be user response here. So we're going to use this data, right? first, what we're going to require here, we're going to require an email. So our email is going to come from the user that we have on top. For the password, it's going to come from the same origin. So it's user.password. So Firebase will take care of the encryption for us. We don't need to do any encryption here. Okay, we don't need to do any encryption, but we need to do encryption when we are trying to create the one that we're going to store in our database. So email verified, and we're going to say false. And then here we have a value with the name disabled. So we're just going to say false. So if an account is created, then the account is going to be automatically enabled. It's not going to be disabled. So here we're going to store our response from this function that we're running here. Okay. So from the response, we want to get the UID. Okay. So from the response, we're going to, okay, let's log something here. We're going to log user response dot UID. Okay. So now that we're done creating a Firebase user, now we have to go ahead and create the user that we're going to store in our database. So here we're going to have home. Let's put a name, new user is equals to. We have to use our model to create a user. So inside, the first thing that we're going to require, we're going to require a username, and our username is going to come from user.username, and we're going to require an email, and it's going to come from user.email. Password. So for password, we're going to encrypt the password, right? So let's put it like this for now. We finish our fields, then we can come back and encrypt our password. So here we're going to require UID. So for the UID, it's going to be response.uid. That's why we have this UID here. That's the one that we're going to require here to use down here. So we need to store it in our database. And last but not least, we're going to require a user type. And for user type, we're going to just assign client. So this is how our enums work. Okay. So here we have options, like which ones do we wanna assign to this user. So first, whenever a user is going to create an account, is going to be a client. Okay. And if they follow some steps, let's say they want to open a restaurant, they have to create a restaurant, they'll go through like the verification process. After that verification process, then there'll be a change in the user type. Okay, their role changes if the information they provide is relevant enough for them to be given a pass to become a vendor or a driver. Okay, so we're done with this part, but we need to deal with our password. So to deal with our password, let's go ahead and we're going to use crypto.js. Okay, so this is crypto.js, the instance that we have on top. And from this instance, we want to access AES, and we need to encrypt. Okay, so we need to encrypt the password. And to encrypt the password, we require a secret key. So our secret key is going to come from our .env file. So we need to access our .env file. So we use process.env. Then here we're going to use the variable with the name secret. This is the variable that we're going to use. So let's go ahead and paste the variable name here. Okay. And then we need to convert this encrypted password to string. So now we have an encrypted password here. So that's all that we need to do. After this, now we need to go ahead and save this user to our database. So right at the bottom, we are going to await new user, and then we save the data to our database. Now that our user has been created and saved, we need to go ahead and send a response back to the user that, okay, your account has been successfully created. So whenever we're creating a user or creating a new object, not a new object, we're creating something in our database. So our status has to be 201, and we have to pass JSON data alongside with the status code. So for this one, we're just going to pass the status. So for status here, we're going to pass a status, and our status is going to be a boolean with the name. We're going to just pass through to the user, like that your account has been successfully created. So if this is true, then we're going to redirect the user to the login page. Then they can log in, something like that. That's the flow. So if we do have an error, we need to send back a status. Okay. So our status for this part is going to be 500, and we need to pass back JSON. So our JSON is going to be post. Let's just say post here. And then we pass the error. We can pass the error message. That's okay. Or we can just pass a string. Error creating user. Okay. Something like that. So we are done with this function, creating a user. Next, we're going to be working on logging in a user. After these two, then we can go ahead and try to run a test in Postman. Then we can proceed to our user controller, where we are going to be getting users, deleting users, and updating users. Okay. Let's move on to our login user. Okay. So in our login user, the first thing that we require is going to be the try catch block. So we need to have try catch. So in our try, the first thing we need to capture the data from our database and store it in our user instance. So this user instance that we just created is going to wait for our call to the database. Okay. So here we're going to wait for the data that we're going to get from our database. And to do that, we need to find one user, and we're going to find that user by email, since we're going to be logging in using an email. So we're going to have our email field here, and our email is going to come from requestbody.email. And whenever we get this data, right, we want to exclude some properties from being sent back to the user. Okay. So let's take, for example, here, we have our user model. Let's put it side by side. Let's close this. So if a user is logging in, then we are not going to send back some properties. Like, for example, we have this value that's being that is created by Mongo. So we need to also exclude updated date. That's a field created by MongoDB. Whenever we create it, need to exclude. So to exclude, we just put 0, and we need to exclude the email return. Okay? We don't want to send back the email. So this is for login. Okay, the data we're going to get it in a get get profile. Okay, so for this one, we're going to use it to create what do you call it? Like to create the token that we're going to use to log into the token that we're going to use for future future purposes to log into the account in our front end. So let's leave the email here. We need the email. Okay, we're going to exclude it after we create our token. Okay, now that we have our user, we need to go ahead and if not, then let me just close this, but it's clean. So here, if it is not user, then we need to send back a response, and this response is going to be if we find anything. So that means something is wrong. What we can do, we can just send a message. We can just say wrong again, something like that. So I'm going to keep it minimal. But if the user is found, then we're going to go ahead and move on to the next step. So our next step is to go ahead and decrypt the password. Try to match the password that we have in our database with the password that we are getting from our front end. And if these passwords are the same, then we're going to give the user access to the account. Else, the password is wrong. Okay, so that's the basic encrypted password. So for decrypted password, we're going to go to encrypted.js. We're going to just do the same, but the opposite of what we did when we're encrypting. So we need to decrypt password. So we need the password that we're decrypting. So the password that we're decrypting is coming from our database. So we need to access this instance and get the password. After getting the password, we need to provide the secret key to decrypt the password. Right? After decrypting the password, we go ahead and the variable. We convert whatever we've decrypted to string. You're just going to call it decrypted. It equals to decrypted. Okay, so we would bring this variable here, and then we're going to convert it to string. So in here you can see use UTF-8. Okay, so now we have our decrypted password in, okay, and it's a string. So we want to compare this string to the string that we're getting from our request body of password. Okay, So if password is not equal to request dot body dot password, to send a response. The response is going to be a wrong password here. Okay. If it is the same, then we're going to create a token for the user. Okay. So let's bring this here, enlarge it a little bit. No, variable user token t dot signal dot sign, not signal. So to sign a token, we need the values that we're going to sign. So the first one is and this is the user. Okay. We need to check the user type. User type. And for user type, it's going to come from user type. Okay. It's supposed to be user type. And the other thing that we require, let's just include an email in there. Okay. So for the email, these are the fields that we're going to encrypt inside of our token. And for us to encrypt our token, we're going to require the secret key that we're going to use to encrypt our dot, not our .env, but our JWT. Okay, so here we access our .env. So process.env, we're going to access. We need access to this JWT secret. That's the one that we're going to use here. And we need to provide the duration with which our token is going to be valid. So let's take, for example, you want the token to be valid for 5 days. Then inside of the brace, you need to have this expires in, and then you put the number of days. So put 5 D as a string, like this. So we go with let's go. Yeah. So now we have our token, but we need to filter the data that we need to send back to the user. We don't need to send everything because it's pointless for us to send back the password. So we need to just remove some other data and then send back what we have to send back. Okay. So down below, we're going to have a script. So in our script, we're going to remove the password. Okay. So here, that's where we are getting the data. Okay. So here, we're going to exclude the password. These fields have already been excluded already. Okay. So if we don't want to send back the email, we can just remove the email here. And then we send whatever remains. Okay. And we have to give this data that remains a name. So this is the name that we're going to give it to. Or we can call it as use data. You can call it whatever you want. Okay. So I'm just going to go with admin. And after, we need to send back a response to the user. Okay. So to send back, say response.status. So for our status, it's going to be 200, and we need to send back a JSON. So for JSON, we're going to send back the data, this data, and we are also going to send back the token. Okay. So to send back the data, we need a spread operator, and we need to the data, send back the user token. So let's say if we do have an error, then we're going to catch an error, and then just log something, send back a response. Okay, post, and then here we can put error message like that. So we are done with our login function. Next, we're going to go ahead and create a router for our auth controller. Then we can run a test, create a user, log in a user, and then we can proceed to create the user controller. We're done with these two. The next thing that we need to do, we need to go ahead and create a router inside of our routes. So this router, we're going to call it auth. Okay. So it's going to be our auth routes. So it's going to be auth.js. So in our auth, we're going to require a router. So here we need to create an instance of our router. Here is going to be router, and it's going to come from Express. Okay. It's going to come from Express router. Okay. So now that we have an instance of our router, down at the bottom, we need to go ahead and import an instance of our controller. Our controller name is auth controller. Okay, and auth controller is going to come from controller directory. So we need to access our, which is controllers. Is it controller? Controllers, not controller. So it's supposed to be controller. And from controllers, we're going to get auth controller. Okay. Specifically for just registering a user. So we use the instance that we create on top, this router instance that we created to get, not to get, but we are going to be using a post request. So here we just need to put slash. Okay. When registering, we're going to access our auth controller, and from our auth controller, we're going to create a user. Okay. So that's our first route, and we need to create our next route, which is to log in a user. Okay. So to log in a user, we're going to have this part login, and here in our controller, it's supposed to be login user. Okay. So these are going to be unprotected routes. So for these two, we don't need any middleware. They're good the way they are, but we need to go ahead and just export these two. So we're going to do the same as we did for our controllers, and our models. So here we're going to export the router. Let's put the router here like that. Let's just close that. So we are done with this part. Next, we're going to go to our server.js. So in our server, we want to get rid of this. But before, right at the top, we need an instance of this router that we created. So below. Let's just change this so that it can be the same as the one that we have in our .env. Okay. So here I'm going to create an instance const supposed to be with router. Okay. Is equals to require. We need the name of our router, not the name per se, but the path. So our router is coming from our routes. Then from our routes, we need to get this auth route. Okay. And this is the name that we're going to use for that particular route when we are calling it here. Okay. So here it's supposed to be app.use, and we're going to use the router to access our endpoint. Okay. So we need to give an endpoint. But for our authentication, we're just going to use slash. But for other APIs, then we're going to use a different approach. And here we need to assign our auth router. So that's going to be our first. And we don't have an error. So that means whatever we didn't make an error. But if we did make an error, then we're going to see that error whenever we are going to be testing our endpoints in Postman. Okay. But so far so good. This is the process that we need to do to just create, like, from the models, connecting to database models, controllers, the router, and then hooking the routers to our server. Okay, so that's what that we need to do. Next, we're going to be testing the endpoints in Postman. Then we can move on to the next one, which is the user controllers. Okay, so now that we have everything set up, we need to go ahead and run a test of our API in Postman. Okay, so we need to go ahead and open Postman. But before we proceed, we need to go ahead and have a collection, a Postman collection. Okay, so this collection is going to be provided to you beforehand. So you need to make sure that you have that collection in order for you to follow along. Okay. So here, what I'm going to do on my desktop, I do have the collection. So I'm just going to run you through the process of how to import it and how to use it. Okay. So this is the collection that we're going to be using. So we just need to open Postman, and in Postman, we need to import, okay, the collection. So here it's either you can select or you can drag and drop the file. So I'm going to select a file and go to desktop. In desktop, I'm going to open the collection. Okay. So after opening the collection will be imported. You have this same collection in your Postman. So we want to deal with our auth folder first. Okay. So the first thing that we need to do, we need to sign up a user. So if you didn't change anything, that means everything that you have is the same as what I have on my end. So we can just go ahead and run a test. But if you change something, let's say the port number or the endpoint, then you need to go ahead and take a step forward to, like, change the port number and change the endpoint here. But this is good. What I'm just going to do, I'm just going to go to the body. So in the body, we're going to require the username, email, and password. Those are the three fields that we're going to require in order for us to create an account. Okay. So I have another account already existing in the backend. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to change the name here, and I'm going to say the best tech. Okay. And have an email. Okay. Okay. So I'm just going to call it dbs at kings.com. The password remains the same. So I'm going to go ahead and create this account. So if our request is successful, then this is what we get. Okay. And if you look at our status, we have a 201. That means our account has been successfully created. So the next thing that we need to do, we need to go ahead and check the data in our Firebase and in our database. Okay. Let's go to our browser. In our browser, okay, this is the Firebase account that we're using. So we are just going to refresh it. Okay, so this is the account that we just created, right? And if we go to our database, just refresh. Okay, it might take a little bit. No, okay, that's a different one. Let's see. Let's take a look. Okay, controller. Looks like the data is not appearing in our database. Okay, let me visit the database that we created together, this collection. Let's check whether we do have something. We go to database, browse collection. Okay, so this is the account that we just created. Okay, so everything checks out. Everything checks out. So if you take a look here, now we have the username, the email, UID. This UID is the same as the one that we got from our backend. So if you take a look, this UID is the one that we have here. The password is encrypted. Addresses, it's an empty array. User type, client. The profile, we have our default profile, and we have the created it and updated it. So that's all that we need to do to create an account. Next, we're going to use the same credentials that we just created to log in a user. Okay. So let's go back. We tag the email from here. Go to login, body. Then we just change the email here, and then send the request. Okay. So if we send the request, we're going to get this data back. Okay. We're going to get the ID, the username, the UID, addresses. We are going to get the user type, profile, and the token. Okay. So we want to copy this token. After copying this token, we're going to put it here in authentication. Let's see. Okay. So what we can do, instead of putting it here, we can inherit from the auth folder. So if we click here, then we can put our token here. So let's paste it here because we want to use it when we're getting our profile. That is going to be the next thing that we're going to do. Okay, so far so good. Our endpoints are working fine. Next, let's move on to create the user controller. And then we can just run some tests, and then we can move on to the next thing. So before we proceed, let's go ahead and get rid of this. Let's move on. The first thing that we need to do, since most of the endpoints that we're going to be working on, the endpoints, the APIs that we're going to be working on, they require a middleware. We need to create our middleware. Okay. And then we can proceed to create the controllers that we need to to create. Okay, so first in our middleware folder, we need to create a new file and we need to call it verify token. Okay, so that's going to be the name and it has to be a JS file. After creating the file, we need to go ahead and have an instance of our JWT. So right on top, const JWT is equals to a required JSON web token. Okay, so now that we have our JSON web token, we can go ahead and create our first middleware, which is going to have a name, the verify token. Okay, so our verify token is going to take in a request, response, and next. Request, response, and then next. So here we need to capture our header, and then we can process them a little bit further to get our token. Okay, and then we verify whether that token is valid or not. Okay, so here we're going to have a variable with the name auth headers, and it's going to come from request headers dot authorization. Okay, so make sure that the spelling of authorization is correct. Okay, so once we need to check whether we have this authorization or not. We want to check whether we have something in auth headers. Okay, if we do have something, then we're going to go ahead and create an instance where we're going to store the token. Okay, so here we need to get the token from our header, because when we are putting our token, our bearer token in our auth headers, we're going to put it like this. Is it like bearer and then space, then we put our token, right? So we need to retrieve the token only. We don't want the bearer and we don't want the space. Okay, so that's what we are going to do in this line, and then we can decrypt the token and get the values that we want. Okay, so here we're going to access our auth headers, and from our auth headers we're going to use the split method, since it's going to be a string. So we need to split where we have a space. Okay, so this is a space, and we are going to get the first item after that space. Okay, so it's beer space and then item 1. So that means our beer is going to be item 0, like indices, how we do index, like index 0, index 1, index 2. It starts from 0, so we're getting the first object, the first item after this space. Once we have our token, we need to verify whether it's a valid token or not. So we need to call JWT, and we need to verify. To verify, we need to call the verify method. And in our method, we're going to require a token. This token is the token that we have in here. Okay. And we need to use the secret key. Okay. Process.env dot. This one is supposed to be JWT underscore secret. That's the one that we're going to use. And our function is going to be asynchronous. And in here, we're going to have error and our use. Okay. So if we do have an error, then we need to go ahead and send something back to the user. Like, okay, let's say it's not a valid token. We need to tell the user that the token is not valid. Something like that. So here we just need to return a status, and our status here is going to be 403. It's supposed to be 403. Something wrong with my keyboard. 403, and we need to send back a JSON. Okay. So in our JSON, we're going to pass the status, and our status is going to be false. Since if we have a successful request, we're sending true. So for a failed request, we're going to pass false, and then we're going to pass the message. So our message here, we can put it as a string. So we can say invalid token, something like that. Let's save that part. But if we do have, if everything checks out at this stage, then we need to get the user, okay? Retrieve the data that we have in our request.user is equals to user. We need to assign this to this value that we have here, okay? And then we jump to the next. So we can inject this user to our function. So that's going to be our first. But before we proceed, what we need to do, we need to go ahead and just export them one by one, okay? Once we're working, we need to export our middlewares. So right at the bottom, we're going to have module.exports. And the first one that we're going to export is verify token, okay? That's the first. So right at the bottom, we need to create another one. We need to verify like whether a user and that's making a request, is that user a client, a driver, a vendor, or an admin? If it's one of those four, then they should be allowed to do whatever they want to do in the application. If they're not, then that user is restricted to perform some certain tasks. Okay. So here we are going to have another one with the name verify and authorization. Okay, and it takes the same parameters as we have on top. So we can just copy from here, paste, and we close. After we close, right inside, we're going to use the one, this token that we have right on top, this function. Okay. So if whatever we put in this function is valid, then we can go ahead and process the data a little bit better. Okay. So here we're going to have a request, a response, and we're not going to have next. Here we can have our function in here. Okay. So that's going to be our next. So we're going to say if we need to check whether the request user, the user who's making that particular request. Okay, let's user type. Let's close it here. So if the user type, so like the best way to make it, like to just explain it, when we created this token, we have this user type, right? So this is the user type that we want to access and check whether this user type is of a particular type, like whether it's a client, admin, or vendor. Okay, so here, if it's a client, then that client is allowed to move on to the next step, to run the next function. Okay, so we have client, that's going to be our first. So here we're going to use the all. Okay, so next we're going to have a vendor, admin, supposed to be admin. You don't want to make a typo. Your admin won't be able to access the application. The driver. Okay, so these four user types are allowed to access the application. Okay, somehow. So here, if this condition is met, then we're going to go to the next function. Else that particular user is not authorized to perform a certain task. Okay, so we can send back a response, not return, but response dot status, and our status is going to be 403, and we need to pass back JSON, and we need to send back a message. Okay, let's close it, and let's close it there. So for our message, we're going to say you're not authorized. Okay, something like that. So we need to export this middleware. So that's our second middleware. So we need to have one for the vendor, one for the driver, and one for the admin. So we need to have like quite a lot. So what we can do now, our process is going to be a little bit easy. We can copy the one that we just created, paste it down, we change the name, and we're going to call it a verify vendor. Okay, like that. Okay, so if the user type is equals to request user type, if request user dot user type is equals to vendor, then we're going to proceed. But we need to also give the admin access to what a vendor can do. Okay, so we're going to leave these two here. Okay, if it's either the vendor or the admin, they can perform the task. Else, if it is a driver who's trying to perform a vendor operation, then we're going to bar that driver from proceeding to execute the function they want to execute. Okay, so we need to export this one. We need to have the one for the driver. Driver or admin, then they can perform some certain task. So let's export it. And below, we're going to have the one for the admin. Okay, so this one will protect everything from all other users. Only the admin can access some certain functions. That's why we are going to have a verify admin. The person has to be an admin to be able to perform. Let's say we have a newly registered restaurant, and you need to approve that restaurant before they can start posting their menus on your application. Okay, so that approval process, it has to be done with a person who has the authority. Okay, so that's why we do have an admin here. Okay, so now that we have this function, we are done with our middlewares. We can just go ahead and export our middlewares. So we're done with our middlewares. Next, we're going to work on our user controller. Right now, we need to go ahead and work on our user controller. So we need to create a new file inside of our controllers, and we're going to call it user controller. And it has to be a JS file. Okay. So for our user controller, we're going to require the same model that we have in our auth controller. So you might as well just copy this, paste it down here. Again, below, we're going to export our functions. Okay. When you export, and we put our functions inside of our braces. So the first function that we're going to create is to get user. Okay. Get user. So our get user function is going to be asynchronous, and it's going to take in a request and a response. Requests, response. Okay. So here we're going to have a try catch block. Okay. A try catch block. So we need to access our database and get the user. Okay. So right at the top, let's create a variable with the name user ID. So this user ID, we're going to get it from our middleware. Okay. So it's supposed to be request, not response, but request user dot ID. Okay. So we need to access our token, get the ID, and then we use that ID to find the user here. So here we need to create another variable, and we need to call it user, and it's going to await our user. And here we're going to find one by ID. It's supposed to be find by ID. Okay. So we need to pass the ID. So the ID is going to be user ID. So once we have the data, we need to process it a little bit further. We need to get rid of the password. So right at the bottom, we're going to have a spread operator. Let's see. Okay, when we're getting a user, it's best if we just do it here right on top so that we can have everything in one line. So here it's supposed to be underscore ID. Okay. And in here, we need to exclude the password. We also need to exclude underscore v. And we need to exclude created it and updated it. Okay, so let's go ahead. Okay, those are the variables that we're going to exclude when we're getting this user. Okay, once we have this user, now we need to send back a response. So we're going to have response.status. So our status here is going to be 200 since it's a successful response, and we need to send back JSON. So in our JSON, we're going to have our data. So we're going to just pass back the user. Okay, this user that we have here. Let's format our code a little bit. Let's save. If we do have an error, we need to catch that error and we send back a response. So right at the bottom, we're going to send back a response with the status. Okay. Our status here is going to be 500. And we need to pass back the message. Okay. Okay. Let's saying error retrieving user. Okay. And then this is going to be the error.message. So that's going to be our function to get user. So let's go ahead and create another one to delete a user. Okay, so it's going to take the same parameters as the one that we have on top. And then inside, to delete a user, we're going to require an ID as well. So let's have our try catch first. After our try catch, then we can access our database. But first, we need to have this ID. Okay. So let's paste our ID here. So here we're going to await user dot. It's supposed to be find one and delete. Okay. And we're going to use the user ID. Then we can pass back the response. Okay. So our response is going to be a 200. Like that. So it's going to be response status 200. And in our JSON, we're going to pass the message. We're going to pass the message in the status. So here we're going to have status. Our status is going to be true. And for a message, we can say it's going to be a string. User deleted successfully. That's okay. So we can just save. If we do have an error, we're going to just pass back a 500, a status code 500, and then we pass back a message, error deleting user. Okay, and we don't need to pass back this message. So that's all that we need to do here. And down below, we're going to create one to update a user. Okay, it's supposed to be update user. So when we're updating a user, we're going to require the same parameters, and our function has to be asynchronous. So here we want to get the request response, and after we have this, then we need to proceed to our function. And in our function, we're going to also require an ID. Okay. So now that we have our ID, we can have a try catch. So inside of our try catch, what we're going to do, we're going to go ahead and try to update. Okay, so here we're going to have const updated user. Supposed to be updated user here. Updated user is equals to await user dot find one and update. Okay, so we're finding a user using the ID that we have on top. So we need to pass our user ID. Once we pass our user ID, then we need to set the data that we want to update. Okay, so here we're going to set, we need set. Okay, the set method. Let's see. We need to put it in braces. In our braces, that's when we are going to put set. So here we need our requests dot body. And right outside, we need to set new to true. Okay, new to true. After we set new to true, then we're going to just pass back a response. We can just say user updated. Okay, so as our response, let's go ahead and use this one. Okay, we can copy this. We come down here, we paste it. Looks like I didn't copy. Okay, so let's go ahead. Just copy here, paste it down. Status is equals to true, message, user updated. Updated successfully. Okay, so that's going to be our message. So here we don't need this because we're not going to return any data. Okay, so we should leave it like that. And if we have an error, we need to catch that error and then send back a response. Okay, message error updating user. Okay, so it's going to be like that. So we are done with this. The next thing that we need to do, we need to go ahead, create our router for our user, and then let's move on. We want to go ahead and create our user router. Okay, so we need to create a new file and we need to call it user, and it has to be a JS file. After creating this file, we need to go ahead and import our router. So we can just copy this file that we have here and we can paste everything in here. Okay, that's wrong. You just need to copy everything that we have, paste it in here. So this part remains the same. So here we need to just change this from auth to user. Okay, so it's supposed to be user controller, and we're getting it from user controller. So if we hover over, pressing command and click, we should be taken to the user controller. So that means we've successfully imported the user controller. The next thing that we need to do, we need to go ahead and import our middleware. So here we're going to have const, and then go to our middlewares. I'm going to copy these, but I'm going to delete some of them since we're not going to be using them in here. Is equal to require, we have to specify the path where we are getting these middlewares. So these middlewares are going to come from our middleware folder. Inside our middleware folder, we want to access verify token. Okay, so we need to protect our routes. So our first one is going to be get, and we are going to be getting user. So we need to remove this, and our controller is going to be our user controller, and from our user controller we're going to get user. Okay, so we need to specify we need to include the middleware that we're going to use. So for this one, we're going to use verify and authorize. Okay, so if we verify and authorize, then we're going to get our user ID from our token, and then we can use that user ID to get the user. Okay, that's the first. Next, let's go ahead and have delete. So here, delete is going to be the same. So we're just going to copy up until that point, paste it here. So we need to map it to the correct function. The next one is going to be a put. Okay, so here now we're going to put, and we're going to map it to update. Okay, so we're not going to be using all the other middlewares, so we might as well just remove them from here. Okay, and then let's go to our server. Okay, server.js. In our server.js, we need to import a router. Okay, so our router name is going to be user router. Okay, like that, and we need to map it to the correct file, which is the user. Okay, and down at the bottom, we need to access our router. Okay, and we need to change how we call our router. So now we are using /API/ and then we're going to be calling this endpoint users. Okay, and we're going to be using a user router here. Okay, so that's all that we need to do here. The next thing that we're going to do, we're going to run a test in Postman. Okay, so we are done creating our router, hooking our router to our server.js. Next, we're going to just run a test in Postman, and then we can move on to the next one. Before we run our test, we need to take care of something. So here, if you take a look, here I made a typo. It's supposed to be secret. That's why we should be copying these variables from our .env directly rather than typing. Okay, so if you have a typo, then it's going to be hard. You're not going to get the token is not going to get verified. And down here, you need to add return. Okay, after you return, everything will check out. So just logging. So let me remove the log. And down below, everything remains the same. So what we need to do, we need to run a GET request. So we go to Postman. In Postman, we're going to go ahead and inherit from parent. So if you're inheriting from parent, we are putting our token to this folder. Okay. So we come to authorization, choose bearer token, and then we paste our token down here. Okay. So in order for us to get this token, we just need to come here and then log in. Okay. After logging in, we just need to copy the token and then we paste it here. Then we save. We close this. We go to our profile. In our profile, that's where we're inheriting from our parent. Our parent is this folder. Okay. And then we send the request. Okay. After we send the request, this is the data that we're going to get. This is the same username, email, UID, user type, and the profile. Okay. So we're done with that part. If you want to delete, then you can just go ahead and Control C. You have to change this to delete. Okay, so you're deleting using the same token. So that's what you just need to do, and just change the name here to delete. Okay. So if I send the request, then the user is going to be successfully deleted. But not one thing. The way that we set up our Firebase, our authentication, you need to find a way to also delete from Firebase. Okay. So what I'm going to do here, I'm just going to say DB. Okay. And leave everything the same. After that, I'm just going to send the request to create a user. Okay, so we have a user and we're going to log in that user. So this user this is our new user. Our UID is different. Our user ID is different. And we just copy our token here. We paste our token to our authentication, authorization, save, and then we can get a profile. Okay, so this is the new user that we created. Okay, so we are done with that part. Next, we're going to move on to some different. So what we can do, we can move on to restaurants, creating restaurants. Then we can create food items. Okay, because restaurants is going to be at least one of the biggest parts of our backend application, and food is going to be almost the same as our restaurants. So we should take care of those, and then we can go on to take care of categories, cards, address. Address might be smaller, but we are going to need an address later on. So we might as well just proceed and then take care of the address a little bit later on. So right now, let's go ahead and create our restaurant models so we can close all these files. We don't require them anymore. So next thing that we need to do, we need to go to models and create a new model. And we're going to call it restaurant. Supposed to be restaurant in lowercase. Okay, so the restaurant. Okay, so for this one, we need to create the schema. Okay, so we can just copy the schema that we have for user, and we're going to change the name. Okay, from user schema to restaurant. Okay, so the name can be lowercase. Here, I'm going to go with a lowercase restaurant schema, and we need to change the name from user model to restaurant. Like that. Okay, so we're done with that part. Next, we need to focus on our fields. Okay, so for fields, the first thing that we're going to require, a title. Okay, that's going to be the title of the restaurant, and we need time. Like, how much time do they take to prepare food on a regular? And we're going to require image URL. So for image URL, we're going to set it as a string. Okay, we're going to set it as a string, and it's going to be required. Okay, it doesn't have to be unique here. Same as for the time, it doesn't have to be unique, so we need to get rid of that. Right at the bottom, we're going to have foods. Like, what kind of food do they serve? Okay, so here we will have to make it an array, and it's not going to be required. We're going to have another field with the name pickup. The pickup is going to be a boolean. Required, we're going to set it to true. By default, we're going to set it to false. Let's put it to true. Like, most of these, they will like translate way much better when we're dealing with our front end, but it's hard to explain some of the stuff from the back end because you don't have a clear picture of like what's really going on. So I'm just going to write the fields, and when we are in the front end, then we can try to have like a clear picture of what we are trying to achieve. Pickup, we're going to have another value with the name delivery. So here, some restaurants, they're just for Uber. They don't have like a place whereby okay a person can come or they want to keep their location disclosed or something. So in that case, if this value is set to just pick up, this pickup is set to true. That means this is a real restaurant. They're not just making food and delivering. But if it is set to false, that means they're just making food and delivering the food. No one is going to go to that restaurant to pick up anything by themselves. Okay. So the other boolean can be true as well. And down at the bottom, we are going to require owner. Okay, so for owner, it's going to be a string. Required is going to be true. Okay, so this one is going to be the ID of the user who created a restaurant. Okay, and we need a code. So we're going to use codes. Okay, to track the location of our restaurant. We are going to use code. So let's take, for example, if you are in California, like San Francisco, which part? Let's say Union Square. Okay. So we're going to use a specific code for Union Square. So like if a restaurant is in Union Square and you're in Union Square, we are going to recommend more restaurants to you on the application using the code. That's the location code of Union Square. That part is like the district. Okay. So it's going to be a string. And then right at the bottom, we're going to require a logo URL. Okay. So a logo URL can be like this. And then you can set the URL a little bit later. That's okay. And we're going to also require rating. So for rating, it's going to be of type number. Okay. So for number, we're going to require the mean value. Our mean value is going to be 1, and our max value is going to be 5. Alright, like that. And we also need the rating count. So for our rating count is going to be in a string, not a number. And let's just put it as a string. And let's close it here. Let's add a comma right at the top. So our error is gone. And this rating count is not going to be required. And right inside, we're also going to require coordinate of the restaurant. So if you're creating a restaurant, you need to provide the coordinate of that restaurant. Okay. So what we are going to do here, we're going to have an ID. Now let's just make it a string, and required, we're going to set it to true. So let's take, for example, I'm creating a restaurant. I have to create the restaurant whilst I'm at the location of that restaurant. Otherwise, the coordinates that are going to be set to that restaurant are going to be of the place where you are. So if it is not your restaurant's location, then your restaurant might be positioned in a different location from the correct location. So first, we're going to require latitude. So for latitude, your latitude is going to be a number, and it's going to be required. Right at the bottom, we're going to require a longitude. So we're going to require two values, latitude delta and longitude delta. So here we're going to have delta. Okay, it's supposed to be delta here. And right at the bottom, we're also going to have delta I. So we have latitude, longitude, and the other thing that we're going to take into consideration is the address of the restaurant. Okay. So for our address, we're going to have a type, and our type is going to be of type string. And this address is going to be required. So we need to set the required boolean to true. And here we need a title. So I'm doing this because I need to use this data inside of our map. Okay, so when we're in our map, we don't need to get the data from somewhere else. We just need to get it from code, from the coordinates, and display it on our map rather than trying to get data from different places. Okay, so right here, I'm going to make this type as a string. It's supposed to be string. And required is supposed to be set to true. Okay, like that. So we're done creating this schema. So let's just go through it so that we can see whether we didn't make any mistakes. So first we need a title. Our title is a string. We need time. Image URL, food, pickup, delivery owner, code, logo URL, rating count, and coding. Okay, so this is good. So next we're going to focus on creating our functions. Okay, so we're going to have a little bit more functions as compared to the ones that we created before, because we need to have recommendations, we need to add, we need to trigger whether a restaurant is in service or not. Okay, so we need to add one more value here. Okay, is available, a boolean value. Okay, true. Okay, so this boolean value is going to be the one that we use to trigger, like whether a restaurant is operating or not, open or closed. Okay. Okay. The required is going to be true. Yeah. Okay. Since we have a default value, either way, the difference is the same. Is available. So we are done with this part. Next, let's focus on our functions. So before we do that, let's just create a restaurant control. And it has to be a JS file. Okay. For us to create a restaurant, we're going to require the model that we're going to use. So here we need an instance of our restaurant model. Okay, so we're just going to call it a restaurant. So we need to specify the path where we're getting this model. So we need to access our models. After accessing our models, we need to map the file that we want to get to this restaurant. Okay. So as we did before, if we hover over pressing command and press, we're supposed to be taken back to our restaurant model. So let's just close. After that, let's just close down below. We're going to export all the functions that we're going to be creating down here. Okay, so the first one that we're going to create is going to be add restaurant. Okay, so our add restaurant is going to be asynchronous and is going to take a request and a response. Request, response, and then in here we need to go ahead and create our restaurant. Okay, so what we're going to do here, we're going to go ahead and have a try catch block. So in our try, we're going to go ahead and save our data. So we need to have our data right here on top. So we're going to capture the data from our request body. So we need to create an instance of our data. So here is supposed to be a new restaurant. So the data that we're getting the data from our request body. Okay, request.body here. We're not going to do much to make it complicated. So that's how we're getting our data. And then down here in our try, we're going to await this data that we're getting from our request body, and then we're going to save the data to our database like that. And then right at the bottom, we're going to return a response, a status with a response. So our status is going to be 201 since we are done creating something, and our something here in this instance is the restaurant. So here we need to pass the status, and our status is going to be true. And we need to pass a message. Okay, so our message is going to be a string. So we say restaurant successfully created, like that. And if we do have an error, we're going to send back a response with the status 500. So here we're supposed to pass JSON, and then we can just, okay, now let's just do the same here, a string. Let's close it, and let's close it again. So here it's supposed to be, okay, and our error is supposed to be error creating restaurant. So we're done with this function. The next function that we're going to create is to trigger the availability, service availability. So let's just add a comma, and let's have another function here, service availability. Supposed to be availability. Okay, so it's going to be asynchronous, and it's going to take 10 parameters, request response, we add a comma afterwards, and inside we're going to require the restaurant ID. Okay, so we need to create an instance of where we are going to store the restaurant ID, and this restaurant ID is going to come from our params. Okay, ID is equals to request param, like that. So once we have our restaurant ID, we need to go ahead and have a try catch block. In our try, the first thing that we're going to do, we're going to check whether that restaurant exists or not, because you're not going to trigger something that doesn't exist. So we're going to get a restaurant. with the same ID that we have on top. Okay, like that. So we're going to just access find one by ID, and this ID is the ID that we're getting from our params. After getting that, we need to check, like if it is not a restaurant, then we're going to go ahead and return a status like 43. And here we need to pass back a JSON. So in our JSON, we're going to have status, and our status is going to be false. And message, the message that we're going to pass here, we're going to say restaurant not found. So that's all that we need to do there. So if the restaurant exists, then we're going to access this data. Okay. So here it's supposed to be restaurant dot is available is equals to not restaurant is available. Okay, so that's how we trigger. After that, we're just going to await restaurant, and then we save, and then send back a response. Okay, so here we're going to have a response with the status, and our status is going to be 200. And then we need to pass back a JSON. Okay, so our JSON, we're going to pass back a status, and our status is going to be true. Let's see. We need to close this. So we can say availability successfully. Good. Okay. So something like that. And then here, let's just pass the data. Okay. Is available. Let's just bring this so that everything can be visible. It looks like we have an error. This is supposed to be inside. Let's get rid of this comma here. So that's how we're going to do it. If we do have an error, then we're just going to say error tagging restaurant availability. Okay, we can get rid of this error. We don't need it. So that's going to be our second function. So let's move on to our third function, which is to delete the restaurant. Okay. So when you're deleting a restaurant, there's some certain steps that we should take, but I'm not going to go like all the way. It's something that like you can figure out how to do. So once you delete a restaurant, you need to go ahead and find all the, okay, let's say a user deleted the restaurant. You need to go ahead and find all the data or the food that is under that same restaurant, and delete all the food that you have in your database. That's the best way to go about it. So here we're going to take request and response. Let's add a comma first. So to delete a restaurant, we're going to require an ID. So we need to capture our ID like that. After capturing our ID, we're going to have a try catch block. In our try catch block, we need to await. Okay. So it's supposed to be restaurant dot So find one and delete. Okay. So if we're finding one and delete, we are going to delete using our restaurant ID. Like that. And then pass back the data, but this might be a little bit tricky. What if someone passes the wrong ID? Okay. So we need to go ahead and do what we did, like with this. Okay. We can copy this, paste it here. Okay. Find the restaurant with the restaurant ID. If not restaurant, then restaurant not found. If the restaurant is found, then we're going to just delete that restaurant, and then we pass back a response. Okay. So we come down here. The status is going to be true, message is going to be restaurant successfully deleted. Okay. Successfully deleted. Something like that. So let's save. If we have an error, we just return a 500 with the error. So here it's supposed to be deleting the restaurant. Okay. Let's say. And so we are done with that function as well. So we need to go ahead and create our next function, which is get. We need to get a restaurant. Okay. Get a restaurant. So it has to be asynchronous, and it's going to take a request and a response. And we need to go ahead and have the instance of our ID, the ID that we're going to get from our params. And then we're going to use that ID to find a restaurant. So we need to have the try catch block. In our try, we're going to create a variable with the name restaurant, and we're going to await our restaurant. We find one by ID, and then we pass the ID that we get from our params here. Okay. So if the restaurant is not found, then we're going to pass back a 403, 404. It's supposed to be 404 here, not 403. Restaurant not found. Else, we're going to go ahead and return a response. Okay, so it's supposed to be response.status, and our status is going to be a 200, and then we pass back JSON. So our JSON here is going to be the restaurant data that we get from our database. If we do have an error, we're just going to return a 500, and then false message. We can say error retrieving. Supposed to be retrieving the restaurant. Okay, then we get rid of the availability here, like that. So that's all that we need to do to get a restaurant. Next, we need to go ahead and work on the longest one, which is the one that we're going to use to suggest like random restaurants to users. Okay, so in our homepage, when we are when a user opens in the application, we're supposed to suggest them like the restaurants which are closer to them if they set their location. If they don't set their location, then we're just going to suggest random restaurants around. Okay. So here we're going to create one with the name get random restaurants. Okay. Like that. Let's add a comma right on top so that we get rid of the error. So our error is gone. So here it's supposed to be asynchronous. We're going to pass the request and the response. And then in here, what we're going to do, we're going to have a try catch block. So in our try catch block, the first thing that we need to do, we need to create a variable. Okay. So we're going to have let's random restaurant is equals to an empty array. Okay. So below, we're going to have we need to provide the code. Okay. We need to provide the code. If if we do have a code, then we need to send back the data that's related to that code. Okay. But if that code is provided and we can't find anything that's related to that code, we still need to get the data that we need to send back to the user. Okay. So those two scenarios. So this kind of function is like, even if something is not found, we do have to send something back. Okay. So what we're going to do, we're going to have if a request that earns dot code. Okay. If we do have a code, what we need to do, we need to go ahead and set this random restaurant to okay. So here we're going to aggregate some data. We are going to create a pipeline to send back the data to our application. So we're going to use aggregate. Aggregate will allow us to send random data to our front end or to our response. Okay. So we need to have an array. Inside of our array, we're going to first we need something that's going to match the code that's provided in our request param. Okay. So match. So here we're going to match the code. Supposed to be in braces code. Okay. So we're going to match the code. If the code of the restaurant matches the code that's provided in the params, we're going to get that data and pass it back to the front end. And we need to provide the sample size, like how many items do we need to send back to the user. Okay, so for sample here, we're going to have size, and we're going to have a size of 5 items. And down below, we're going to exclude the IDs of these places, not IDs per se, just some of the random data. We're going to exclude them. We don't want to send them back. Projects. So here it's supposed to be underscore p, and then we set it to 0. If we need to exclude something else later on, then we're going to do that. So that's our first. Okay. If this condition is met, then we're going to just return a response right at the bottom. So we can just say if not random restaurant length, then we are going to have another pipeline to get the data. Okay. So this pipeline, we're going to remove the matching criteria. We don't want to match it to anything. We're just going to get any 5 random items and pass them back to our user. Okay. Like that. So that's all that we need to do. At the bottom, we're going to check if online. Then if we have like, if random restaurants got length, like got more than one, okay, then we need to send back whatever we have in that. So we need to send back response status. And here, instead of sending back a status, we're going to just send back random restaurants. Okay. If we do have an error, then we're going to pass back that error. Let's use this. We can say false error finding restaurants. Yeah, okay. So that's going to be our pipeline for getting random restaurants. So let's close it. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. We have 5 functions inside of our restaurants. The next thing that we're going to do is to go ahead and create our routers, and then we can test our. Now let's go ahead and visit our routes folder. In our routes folder, let's create a new file, and we're going to call it restaurant. Okay, it has to be a JS file. We can copy one of the routers that we have here. So we can just select everything, copy, and come back to our restaurant router, paste. So here, we're going to map this to a restaurant. Restaurant controller, okay? Okay, so the file doesn't exist. What we need to do here, it's supposed to be restaurant, so probably I do have a typo here, like that. So this is the controller that we're going to use here, okay? So the first thing, we need to have a posts, okay? So let's just change this. First, let's handle our post. So here, when we are posting, we're just going to use this as our URL, and then restaurants, then add restaurant, okay? So that's going to be our first. Our next is going to be a get, okay? So to get, we need to pass the ID, okay? So if we get restaurant here, we have over, we're going to require a restaurant ID, right? So what we can do here, we can change whatever we have here. So we need to specifically mention whatever we are going to retrieve from our params, okay? So let's just click here, and then here it's supposed to be .id. Everything else remains the same, okay? So this is supposed to be a get. And to get random, we're going to have another get. Okay. And this get has to be a little bit different. So here we're going to let's use this. Let's put it like this: by ID. Like when we want to get a single restaurant, we get by ID. So it's supposed to be API slash restaurants slash by ID slash then the ID. That's how we are going to get one. And to get the random restaurants, we just need to pass a code. Okay, a code here, and then it's supposed to be code here. It's supposed to be code. So we're going to use this code to get random. Okay, so if we hover over, we're going to be using this code, and we're going to map it to the code inside of our restaurants model, which is this code. Okay, so let's save that, and to delete, we're going to just delete using the ID. So here is supposed to be delete restaurant. If we hover over, let's do what we did for get. So we mention specifically what we are getting, which is the ID. And then we just save that, go back, and we need to have a patch. Okay, so for patching, we're going to require an ID as well. And for this ID, we're going to, let's see, it's supposed to be a vendor. Okay, that's the one that we're going to use here. And for delete, we're going to, a person has to be a vendor to be able to perform these tasks. Okay, but to get this one, it has to be open. Get by ID, it also has to be open. A user doesn't have to be logged in. And to post, you just have to be a registered user. Okay, service availability. Okay, so that's all that we need to do for this part. Next, we're going to go ahead and export. Not export, we already exported here. What we need to do, we need to go ahead to our service.js. In our service.js, we need to have our restaurants here. And then we need to have our router. Okay, so right on top, we need to go ahead and have a restaurant router. And we need to map it to the right router, which is restaurant. And let's copy this and then come down here. We paste it here. Okay, so that's going to be our endpoint. So API slash restaurant slash, then we do whatever we want to do. Okay, so we're done with that. Next, we're going to be running a test in Postman on creating a restaurant, patching, getting some random data, something like that. Okay, now that we're done connecting done with our routers and hooking them up to our server.js, what we need to do, we need to go ahead and open Postman. So in Postman, we need to just run a test. Okay, so we need to go to restaurants, add restaurants. Okay, so here, go to the body. Our body is supposed to be raw, and here it's supposed to be JSON. kind of odd that we don't have anything in here. Okay, so I'm going to switch my workspace. Restaurants, and okay. So I'm going to get the data from here. Go back to the same, and then just paste this data. Okay. After pasting the data, I'm just going to change the name here to the best. It's 20. The owner of the restaurant, we can just go to auth, log in, get the ID from here, and then that's the ID that we're going to put here. Let's see, address. When it comes to code, the code, we have to put a specific code, is it? So to put a specific code, I'm going to visit my database. In my database, I'm going to get that's the district. Okay, so district is supposed to be Union Square. That's for me. That's the district that I'm going to get, and the one that I'm going to use use as a code. Okay. That, and everything else, I'm going to let it remain the same. Okay. Because the objective is just to create a restaurant, and I'm going to send this request. Okay, it looks like we do have an error. Let's see. Okay, here it's 6,000 instead of 6,002. Cannot post 44 not found. Let's see. No, okay, it's supposed to be restaurant, not restaurants. So let's just follow the same pattern. So here, instead of just putting restaurants, we're just going to go ahead with restaurant. Okay, go back to Postman, and then we send the request. So at least now we're supposed to have something, a positive feedback. Let's see. Okay, everything is okay here. Go back to Postman. Something is off. The router. Okay, we didn't include the token. We didn't include the token, so that might be the issue. So let's cancel. After canceling, what we can do, we can just come to auth, get the token from here, and then we're going to use it in restaurants. Okay, it's supposed to be bearer, paste our token, and then here we're going to inherit the token from parent. Okay, inherit from parent. So we're getting our token from this folder. False. Error creating restaurant. So let's see. Title time owner code. Let's cross check and see where did we make a mistake. So here, let's go to our function. In our function, let's we have our error. Hit a comma here. Okay, the validation longitude path is required. Delta is required. Okay, so these two, they are required. So let's go back to our model, to our restaurant model. Okay, so we have these two. So we have to have the delta and the latitude delta and longitude delta. So here I'm going to have default values for both. Okay. So that's how you can easily debug. So if you do have an error that you don't understand, just print out the code, the error message, so that you can see what's wrong, and then you can just go ahead and rectify the error. Okay. So for these two, the first one, that's going to be the longitude. So for the longitude, I'm going to put 0.221. That's going to be our longitude. This one is going to be for longitude. So for the latitude, it's going to be 0.0, too many zeros, 122. Okay, like that. So let's just save. After saving, we need to go back to Postman. In Postman, we want to send back the, okay, so we've successfully created a restaurant. Okay, so in order for us to get this restaurant, we need to have the ID, isn't it? So we can go to our database, go to restaurants, and then we can look for the last restaurant that we created, which is this one. Just get the ID, and then we're going to get restaurant by ID. So it's here, it's supposed to be get restaurant. Pass the ID. So it's an open. It's going to be an open. So here, it's supposed to be no authentication, and then send. So we're getting our data back. So far so good. These ones are going to be open as well. No authentication required. So we just need to set it to no auth. So for code, code is going to be a little bit tricky. Let's see. It's going to be a little bit tricky. Union square. Okay. We're getting 1 with union square. So that's going to work. And my other restaurants in the backend, they're using this code. So if you're getting random, we should get more than 1. Okay. So here, let's take, for example, we've got Burger King as our first restaurant, right? And we have other restaurants down below. If we send back this request, let's see. Let's just send with anything random. Then we're going to get random data. Okay. So we are done with those. As for deleting, you can go ahead and test delete, and then we have another one, which is service. You can go ahead and test that one too. I'm not going to, but everything is set to the point that you can just create an endpoint and then create a request, and then you can just run a test.